Well, the new millennium quickly offered two new and monstrous crimes, adding them to plenty of lingering ones. The first was, of course, the terrorist attacks of September 11th. The second is the response to them, which surely took a far greater toll and will take an even greater toll of innocent civilian lives, people who are innocent of any crime and who themselves are victims of the suspected perpetrators of the crimes of September 11th. I'll take for granted here that the perpetrators were the al-Qaeda network and Osama bin Laden. There was a prima facie case supporting that at the outset, and it remains about as it was. No further evidence has come along, which is kind of remarkable, since this has surely been the most intense investigation on the part of the world's intelligence agencies in history. But these are hard things to figure out, and the fact that they don't have much or any evidence is perhaps not too surprising. You can just consider the difficulty of finding out the source of the anthrax scare right here. There's plenty of other examples. In both of these cases, the crimes of September 11th and the crimes of the response, the crimes are considered right and just, in fact, noble, within the doctrinal systems of the perpetrators. And in fact, they're justified by the perpetrators in almost the same words. So Osama bin Laden tells us that violence is justified in self-defense against the infidels who invade and occupy Muslim lands, and against the brutal and corrupt governments that they impose. These words they have quite considerable resonance in the region, even among people who despise and fear him and in fact are his targets. Bush and Blair and others like them proclaim in virtually identical words that violence is justified to expel evil from our lands. The proclamations are virtually identical, but not entirely so. When Osama talks about our lands, he's referring to Muslim lands, so Chechnya and Bosnia and Kashmir, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others. The radical Islamists who were mobilized and trained and nurtured by the CIA and their associates through the 1980s, they despise Russia. But after the Russians had withdrawn from their territory, they did terminate the atrocities within Russia based in Afghanistan. They are, from their point of view, defending Muslim lands, Chechnya now, but not Russia itself. Bush and Blair, on the other hand, when they talk about our lands, they mean the whole world, and they're very clear about it. And that difference reflects the power that they command. The fact that either side can speak without shame of eradicating evil should leave us open-mouthed in astonishment, unless we adopt the easy course of just effacing even very recent history. Another fact that has grim portent is that in both of these cases, the adversaries insist on underscoring the criminality of their acts. They want you to know that they're criminal acts. Now, that's obvious in the case of September 11th, so I won't comment on it. More striking and important for the future is that the same is true of the U.S. response. So the United States pointedly rejected the framework of legitimacy that resides in the international system and the UN Charter. There's no doubt that Washington could have obtained clear and explicit Security Council authorization, not for very attractive reasons. The reasons are clear enough. Russia and China are quite eager to have U.S. authorization for their own horrendous atrocities and crimes. They would therefore go along. England and France have a strong enough imperial legacy so that attacks against the lesser breeds raise no problems, so there would be no veto. But the U.S. chose very pointedly to reject Security Council authorization and to insist on its unique right to act unilaterally in explicit violation of international law and its treaty obligations, and unconstrained by any higher authority. It's incidentally a right that was forcefully proclaimed by Bill Clinton very explicitly, and his predecessors, all in very clear and unambiguous terms. And these are warnings that we can choose to ignore if we like, but at our peril, by ignoring them, surely undermining much possibility of understanding the world that's likely to develop. There's a leading principle of statecraft which lies behind this refusal. It even has a technical name in the literature. It's called establishing credibility. Credibility means that the subjects must know their place. To establish credibility, you make it clear that you act without authority. So if a mafia don wants to collect protection money, he doesn't get a court order, even if he could, because that would undermine credibility. It would imply that there is some authority, and there isn't. And the same holds in international affairs. If you look back at the arguments presented by the United States and Britain for the bombing of Serbia, that was the argument. There were peripheral ones which didn't make sense, but the main one which did make sense was that it's necessary to maintain credibility. Others have to know their place, and that therefore the lack of authorization is a crucial feature of the response. The same, incidentally, was true of the matter of extradition. We don't know if it would have been possible for the U.S. to obtain the extradition of Osama bin Laden and his associates. There were indications that the Taliban were considering that, but the U.S. was very quick to cut off that possibility. They don't want extradition. Extradition would again entail that there is a higher authority, like international law and standard procedures, and there isn't. You have to have the right to act unilaterally with unlimited violence, decisively, as you choose. That's credibility. Unfortunately, that's the way the world works. That's what Tilly is describing and what we know very well from recent history. Well, the reaction to these two crimes, the September 11th and the aftermath, that tells us quite a lot about what's likely to lie ahead if the current tendencies do persist. The atrocities of September 11th are generally regarded as a historic event, and that's true enough. But we should be clear about why. It's not because of the scale of the atrocities, unfortunately. In the civilian toll, the atrocities of September 11th are far from unusual in the annals of violence that falls short of war. All too many examples. For example, the number of people killed on September 11th is approximately the same as the monthly toll of Iraqi children killed as a result of the sanctions. It's been going on for 10 years. The number killed on September 11th is just a fraction of the civilian toll of the one truly uncontroversial case of international terrorism in the recent years, namely the U.S. attack against Nicaragua. Uncontroversial in the light of the judgment of the highest international authorities, the World Court and the Security Council. It's true that all of this has been expunged from history as a result of the normal workings of power, but it is history nevertheless, and not ancient history. In fact, the perpetrators of that crime, those condemned for that crime, happen to be the same people, by and large, who are now declaring a new war on terrorism. Not an insignificant fact, nor is the fact that it's ignored. So the atrocities of September 11th are indeed a historic event, but not because of the scale, rather because of the target. That's, in fact, something totally new. For the United States, this is the first time since the War of 1812, since 1814, when the British burned down Washington. It's the first time that the national territory has been under attack, or for that matter, under any threat. And there's some marginal exceptions, but that's basically true. Pearl Harbor Day yesterday had to do with attacks on U.S. colonies. The national territory has not been threatened or attacked. I won't bother to review what's been done to other people in the 2 centuries since, that you're familiar with, not very pretty. On September 11th, for the first time, the guns were pointed in the opposite direction. And that's a dramatic change, a truly dramatic change. So it is a historic event. And the same is true even more dramatically for Europe. Europe, of course, has suffered murderous destruction and wars, but that's Europeans slaughtering each other. That's been the major sport of Europe for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, the European powers and their offshoots conquered much of the world, leaving a colossal trail of terror and destruction. But Europeans themselves were always safe from attack by their victims. The atrocities were somewhere else. Again, there's rare and limited exceptions. So it isn't at all surprising, in the light of hundreds of years of history, that Europeans should be utterly shocked by the crimes of September 11th, which are a drastic breach of the norms of acceptable behavior of hundreds of years. These are things we're supposed to do to them. They're not supposed to do them to us. And that's the historic change, which is real. It's also not surprising that Europeans and North Americans should remain complacent, maybe mildly regretful, about the even more terrible suffering that's followed September 11th. That dual reaction makes perfect sense. The victims of the second crime are, after all, just miserable Afghans, uncivilized tribes, as Winston Churchill described them with great contempt when he ordered the use of poison gas to inspire a lively terror among them 80 years ago. Remember, that was the ultimate atrocity at that time after the Second World War. And that's typical. Atrocities of that kind carry no moral stigma whatsoever, for one reason, because they're so familiar, even when the only motive is there's no pretext other than just greed or domination. And retribution knows no bounds. There's ample historical precedent for that, and there's authority in the holiest texts that we're taught to revere.